Bodies That Matter. On the Discursive Limits of Sex is a book written by Judith Butler, a prominent philosopher and gender theorist. The book was published in 1993 and is considered a significant contribution to the fields of gender studies, feminist theory, and queer theory. In Bodies That Matter, Butler builds upon her earlier work, especially her groundbreaking book, Gender Trouble, to explore the relationship between language, identity, and embodiment. She delves into how societal norms and cultural constructs shape our understanding of gender and sexuality, and how these norms are enforced through language and discourses. One of the central ideas in the book is the concept of performativity. Butler argues that gender and identity are not fixed, essential categories but are instead socially constructed and performed through repeated actions and behaviors. This challenges the traditional understanding of gender as something inherent and stable. Butler also discusses the ways in which bodies are regulated and defined by societal norms, and how certain bodies are deemed more intelligible or legitimate than others. She critiques the binary understanding of sex and gender, suggesting that these categories are not natural or universal but are rather products of cultural and historical contexts. Furthermore, Butler engages with the works of philosophers like Michel Foucault and Jacques Derrida to explore the complexities of power, discourse, and the politics of identity. She also addresses the intersections between gender, race, and sexuality, highlighting how these categories are interwoven in complex ways. Overall, Bodies That Matter challenges readers to critically examine the ways in which bodies, identities, and norms are constructed and regulated within society. The book has had a significant impact on feminist theory, queer theory, and discussions around the nature of gender and sexuality. Introduction. Bodies and Power. Butler begins by discussing how bodies are not merely passive entities but are constructed and produced through discourse, language, and social norms. She introduces the concept of performativity, which refers to the repetitive actions and behaviors that constitute our understanding of gender and identity. She argues that identity is not something one possesses but something one does, and this doing is shaped by cultural and historical contexts. Chapter 1. Subjects of Sex, Gender, Desire. In this chapter, Butler examines the construction of subjects based on sex, gender, and desire. She critiques the idea that there is an inherent sex that precedes social construction, and she explores how identities are shaped by regulatory norms and discourses. She introduces the concept of regulatory norms that dictate what is considered intelligible or acceptable in terms of gender and sexuality. Chapter 2. Prohibition, Psychoanalysis, and the Production of the Heterosexual Matrix. This chapter delves into psychoanalytic theories and their role in shaping normative heterosexual identities. Butler discusses how psychoanalysis constructs certain forms of gender and desire as normal, and others as deviant. She also examines how prohibitions against same-sex desires contribute to the construction of heterosexual identity. Chapter 3. Phantasmatic Identification and the Assumption of Sex. Here, Butler explores the idea of phantasmatic identification, where individuals identify with a normative image of their own sex and gender. She discusses how this identification is not a conscious choice but a result of internalized norms and cultural constructs. She also examines how the notion of assumed sex contributes to the binary understanding of gender. Chapter 4. Gender is Burning, Questions of Appropriation and Subversion. This chapter engages with the concept of drag performance and how it challenges traditional notions of gender and identity. Butler discusses the subversive potential of drag, where performers disrupt normative gender roles through exaggerated performances. However, she also raises questions about whether drag can truly challenge norms or if it sometimes reinforces them through parody. Chapter 5. From Parody to Politics. Building on the previous chapter's discussion of drag, Butler explores the political implications of performativity. She examines how acts of subversion can be co-opted by dominant power structures and how resistance is always entangled with norms. She also discusses the potential for political agency within the constraints of normative frameworks. Chapter 6. Subversive Bodily Acts. In the final chapter, Butler delves into the concept of subversive bodily acts, which are performances that challenge dominant norms of gender and identity. She analyzes acts such as cross-dressing, masquerade, and gender non-conforming behaviors. She emphasizes that these acts disrupt the binary framework of sex and gender, highlighting the potential for change and resistance. Conclusion. from parody to politics to performativity. In the conclusion, Butler reiterates the centrality of performativity in understanding how identities are constructed and contested. She emphasizes that her work is not about providing a new theory of gender but rather about opening up new avenues for thinking about how norms are produced and resisted. Overall, Bodies That Matter is a complex and thought-provoking exploration of the relationship between language, identity, and embodiment. Butler challenges conventional understandings of sex, gender, and sexuality, and she invites readers to critically examine the ways in which social norms shape our understanding of bodies and identities. Example: drag performance and performativity. Imagine a drag queen named Alex who regularly performs in a local LGBTQ+ club. Alex's performances involve exaggerating traditional notions of femininity through clothing, makeup, and behavior. These performances challenge societal norms around gender and identity. Let's break down this example using concepts from Butler's book. Performativity. According to Butler, gender is not an inherent trait but something that is performed and repeated over time. In this example, Alex's drag performances exemplify performativity. By dressing and acting in a way that is associated with femininity, Alex is actively performing a gender identity that contrasts with their assigned male sex. Through these performances, Alex showcases that gender is a series of acts rather than a fixed essence. Regulatory norms. Butler talks about how societal norms regulate what is considered acceptable in terms of gender and sexuality. Alex's drag performances challenge these norms by intentionally breaking free from conventional expectations of how a person with a certain assigned sex should present themselves. Drag challenges the idea that clothing, behavior, and identity should be strictly aligned with one's assigned sex. Subversion and appropriation. Butler discusses how subversion can sometimes be co-opted or limited by dominant power structures. In the case of drag, while it subverts traditional gender roles and expectations, it's important to recognize that it can also be appropriated or misunderstood by mainstream media or society. Some might view drag as mere entertainment without understanding its deeper implications for challenging normative ideas of gender. Assumed sex. Butler explores the concept of assumed sex, where individuals are assumed to have a certain sex based on their appearance or performance. In the case of drag performers, their assumed sex might be different from their assigned sex. For example, the audience might assume that Alex is a woman based on their drag performance, even though their assigned sex might be male. Phantasmatic identification. Butler discusses how individuals identify with a normative image of their own sex and gender. In this example, drag performers like Alex might intentionally adopt and exaggerate certain feminine attributes, engaging in phantasmatic identification with a normative image of femininity. This highlights the performative nature of gender identity. Overall, this example of drag performance helps illustrate many of the key concepts from Bodies That Matter. It demonstrates how performativity, regulatory norms, subversion, assumed sex, and phantasmatic identification interact to challenge and reshape traditional understandings of gender and identity. Bodies That Matter. On the Discursive Limits of Sex, by Judith. Butler explores a variety of complex themes related to gender, identity, language, and power. Here are some of the central themes addressed in the book. Performativity and identity. The concept of performativity is at the core of the book. Butler argues that identity, particularly gender identity, is not an innate or stable characteristic but something that is constructed and performed through repeated actions and behaviors. This challenges traditional notions of fixed gender roles and identities. Regulatory norms. Butler examines how societal norms and cultural discourses regulate and dictate what is considered intelligible or acceptable in terms of gender and sexuality. These norms influence how bodies are understood and categorized within society. Binary frameworks. The book critiques the binary understanding of sex and gender, suggesting that these categories are not natural or universal but rather products of cultural and historical contexts. Butler explores how this binary framework limits and restricts the possibilities for understanding diverse identities. Power and discourse. Butler engages with the work of Michel Foucault and other theorists to explore the ways in which power operates through discourse. She examines how language and societal norms are used to establish and maintain power dynamics, particularly in relation to gender and sexuality. Subversion and resistance. The book discusses the potential for subversion and resistance within normative frameworks. Butler examines how certain performances, like drag, challenge and disrupt dominant understandings of gender and identity. However, she also acknowledges that these acts of resistance can sometimes be limited or co-opted by existing power structures. Assumed sex and phantasmatic identification. Butler introduces the concept of assumed sex, where individuals are assumed to possess a certain sex based on appearance or behavior. She also explores phantasmatic identification, where individuals identify with a normative image of their sex or gender. These concepts contribute to the formation of gender identities. Sexuality and desire. The book addresses how sexuality and desire are constructed and regulated within societal norms. Butler critiques the binary understanding of desire and explores how certain desires are marginalized or pathologized. Intersectionality. While not the primary focus, the book touches on the intersections between gender, race, and sexuality. Butler acknowledges the complex ways in which different identity categories interact and shape experiences of power and identity. Fluidity and change. Butler's exploration of performativity and the constructed nature of identity opens up the possibility for fluidity and change in how identities are understood and expressed. This challenges the idea that identities are fixed and unchanging. Overall, Bodies That Matter delves into intricate discussions about how language, norms, and power shape our understanding of bodies and identities. The themes explored in the book have had a profound impact on feminist theory, queer theory, and the broader fields of gender and sexuality studies. Let's delve into an analysis of some key aspects of Judith Butler's Bodies That Matter, on the discursive limits of sex. Deconstruction of binary frameworks. One of the most significant contributions of Butler's work is her deconstruction of binary frameworks related to sex, gender, and desire. She challenges the conventional understanding that there are only two fixed and opposing categories. By emphasizing the performative nature of identity, Butler disrupts the idea that individuals must fit neatly into predefined boxes. This analysis has had a profound impact on dismantling the limitations imposed by binary thinking, allowing for a more nuanced and inclusive understanding of diverse identities. Performativity and fluidity. Butler's concept of performativity revolutionized how we conceptualize identity. By presenting identity as something continually performed and constructed through actions, she opens up possibilities for fluidity and change. This insight is particularly empowering for individuals who may not align with traditional gender norms. It also encourages a more dynamic perspective on identity, allowing for exploration and self-discovery without the constraints of static categories. Power and norms. Butler's exploration of power dynamics and normative frameworks highlights the ways in which societal norms dictate what is considered normal or acceptable. This analysis demonstrates the role of language and discourse in shaping our understanding of bodies and identities. By exposing how norms are upheld and reinforced, Butler encourages critical reflection on the sources of power and the potential for resistance and change. Intersectionality. While not the central focus of the book, Butler's discussion of intersectionality, how different forms of identity intersect and influence one another, acknowledges the complex nature of lived experiences. This recognition prompts readers to consider how gender, race, sexuality, and other factors intersect to shape an individual's position within society and their interactions with power structures. Limits of resistance. Butler's work also raises questions about the limits of resistance and subversion. While she highlights the potential for disruption within normative frameworks, she also cautions against assuming that all subversive acts are automatically transformative. This insight underscores the complexities of navigating power dynamics and prompts a deeper consideration of the ways in which resistance can be co-opted or limited by existing structures. Continued relevance. Bodies That Matter remains relevant and influential within ongoing conversations about gender, identity, and sexuality. The book's ideas have been instrumental in shaping the trajectory of feminist and queer theory, as well as informing broader discussions about social justice and equality. The analysis provided by Butler continues to inspire critical thinking and activism aimed at challenging and dismantling oppressive norms. In summary, Bodies That Matter is a groundbreaking work that challenges traditional understandings of sex, gender, and identity. Through her exploration of performativity, power, and the construction of norms, Judith Butler has fundamentally reshaped how we think about bodies, identities, and the complex interplay between language and power in shaping our understanding of the world. Let's examine some key aspects of Judith Butler's Bodies That Matter, on the discursive limits of sex, in more detail. Deconstruction of identity. Butler's work is rooted in the deconstruction of identity as an essential, fixed concept. She challenges the idea that gender and sexuality are inherent traits, arguing instead that they are socially constructed and performed. This deconstruction of identity opens up new avenues for understanding the complexities of human experience beyond rigid categories. Performativity as a lens. The concept of performativity, central to Butler's theory, provides a lens through which to analyze how identity is constructed. By emphasizing repetition and the performative nature of gender and sexuality, she encourages us to see how our actions and behaviors shape and reshape our identities over time. This approach underscores the agency individuals have in creating their own identities. Discursive power and norms. Butler's analysis of discursive power highlights how societal norms are produced and reinforced through language and discourse. She reveals how these norms regulate what is considered acceptable or intelligible within a given culture. By exposing the mechanisms through which power operates, Butler prompts us to question and challenge the ways in which norms shape our understanding of bodies and identities. Subversion and repetition. The book explores the tension between subversion and repetition. While subversive acts can challenge norms and disrupt traditional understandings of identity, they also run the risk of being co-opted or normalized over time. Butler's analysis invites us to critically examine the potential consequences of acts of resistance within existing power structures. Intersectionality and complex identities. While Butler doesn't extensively delve into intersectionality, her work lays the groundwork for understanding how different identity markers intersect and influence each other. This recognition enriches the analysis of power dynamics, as it acknowledges that identity is multifaceted and cannot be reduced to a single axis of oppression or privilege. Continued relevance and critique. Since its publication, Bodies That Matter has been both influential and subject to critique. Some scholars have questioned the universality of Butler's ideas and the potential for her theory to overlook certain experiences, particularly those of marginalized groups. While the book has contributed significantly to feminist and queer theory, ongoing dialogue and critique ensure that the theory continues to evolve and adapt to new perspectives. Impact on activism and academia. The book's ideas have had a profound impact not only within academic circles but also in activism and social movements. It has provided a theoretical foundation for advocating for the rights and recognition of LGBTQ+ individuals and for challenging normative concepts of gender and sexuality. The intersections between theory and activism inspired by Butler's work demonstrate its real-world significance. In conclusion, Bodies That Matter, by Judith Butler challenges established notions of identity, power, and language. By introducing the concept of performativity and examining the ways in which norms are constructed and resisted, the book has reshaped the landscape of gender studies, queer theory, and social activism. Its influence extends beyond academia, sparking critical conversations about how we understand and navigate the complexities of bodies and identities in a diverse and dynamic world.